Thanks, Bailey. I'll share that story about the name a bit later halfway. It's actually the breakdance name. I don't do any wrestling, but I'll get to that.
Breakdance for us.
Not now.
Okay.
Anyway, does anyone remember this picture here? Anyone? No? Maybe now? This was a TV advertising campaign, or also online and social media advertising campaign by Heineken under the name Open Your World. And the concept was to bring together a campus LGBT activist and an alt-right Trump voter to talk to each other over a beer and learn about each other and sort of reduce their preconceptions. The goal of the campaign was to reach millennials specifically. But the question was it working? That's kind of a question we're trying to help marketing people in our company with to answer. So by some measures, it was really great. So it had 11.5 YouTube views and 675 articles were written about it. But later, it turns out the message wasn't really resonating with its target group, which was millennials. Millennials found it a stressful message. It sounded like they had to do a lot of effort, and it's really not something that they associate with drinking beer, which is something effortless. So what Heineken did instead, it changed the campaign and gave it sort of a lighthearted spin and made it about soccer fans missing an important moment. But this is kind of unsatisfying, what happened in this story, right? So we as researchers were trying to avoid such costly mistakes. So how do we do that? How do we measure if a marketing campaign is working? What we typically do is we do brand tracking. So we ask a bunch of people questions about the brand, whether they like it or not. And among the people that we ask, we look at the millennials to see if the marketing campaign had any effect on them. However, when you zoom in to a large group of people that you asked questions, it all of a sudden gets very blurry because the statistical validity of a smaller sample size isn't very great. And if you sort of were to zoom in even deeper and say millennials who watch soccer or millennials who are tech savvy, then the estimates are getting even more blurry. So there is a solution to this problem of inferring from a low sample size with a small target group. And it's called MRP, and it's developed by Columbia professor Andrew Gelman, and it's been used to forecast US elections. And hence the name Mr. P. That's what it's commonly called in the academic community. And the background of the breakdance story is that I was doing breakdance in my early teens, and I didn't plan to share this with anyone. But at one company, after work drinks, I was hinting, so in our new office that we moved to, there's the so-called Flying Steps Academy, which is Germany's most famous breakdance group. And I was casually mentioning that in my early teens I did breakdance, and I was a great fan of that band. And that was a mistake, because I was called on to do breakdance in front of everyone, and ever since then everyone knows about that. So, and they gave me Mr. P as my breakdancer name. But what is Mr. P or MRP? Multi-level regression and post-stratification. Again, it's a statistical technique to make estimates or results of quantitative research more precise. So how does it work? So imagine, in the Heineken example before, your target group is tech-savvy, soccer-playing millennials. And your brand tracking is asking 1,000 people about the brand. So imagine you have 300 tech-savvy people, you have 400 millennials, and you have 150 people that play soccer. So you only have a group of about 20 that combines all these three attributes. this number of 20 gives you a 35% positive association with the brand. So what do you do with it? When you look at it statistically, you have confidence bounds of plus and minus 20 percentage points. So that means the real answer is somewhere between 55 and 15 with a very high likelihood. This is not very precise, and it's not enough to base a decision on that. So this is what you do with a traditional quota sampling model. What you do with MRP, you look at the entire sample. So you're getting information from neighboring cells. I get a bit deeper into that. So what happens as a result is, or how this works mechanically is, so you look at one variable, the association of the brand, and you look at individual variables. Okay, soccer players, and millennials and tech-savvy people, and this is your basic model. So the influence of these three variables on the brand association is the result you estimate for someone with these three attributes. So how it works basically is you look into soccer players that you had 150 in your sample, and you look, okay, how many people like the brand and how many don't like the brand? And is there actually a difference? And the model takes that difference. The same with millennials. You look at your sample of 400, and you look, is there actually a difference between millennials and non-millennials? The same with tech-savvy people. You look at the difference in the answers of the group who has the attribute or who doesn't have the attribute. So it's a fairly simple, you can do multiple versions of it, like a simple linear regression, or once you build the model, you need to build multilinear models to account for dependencies and things like that. But this is basically how it works. And as a result, what you come up with, instead of confidence bounds of 55 to 15%, you have 36% to 34%, because you use the entire sample size to estimate the results. I give one case study to show how this looks in practice, based on a study we did in Germany on brand awareness of Heineken. So we did 1,000 interviews per month over 3 months to estimate if there were any changes. So if you do that the traditional way and look at soccer-playing millennials, we had 50 people in our sample in October, 60 in November, 77 in December. And the results for them for positive brand association were the following: 68%, 73%, and after the campaign, it was at 64%. So that's not really something I would personally trust as a basis for a decision, that this is telling me the truth if there were any changes due to my campaign. So this is because this is the confidence bounds. Like, the real answers could vary a lot depending on the strength of the sample. So when you do it with MRP, and we use the same data, so you can apply it to any data set that you already have, we had these results. So basically now you're looking at the entire sample, and we had 69, 70%, and 68%. So, and the confidence bounds were just 2 percentage points. Why am I sharing with you an example that seems unexciting? Nothing really changed, because very often that's just the case. And we, as researchers, need to speak truth to managers that would like to see a positive effect, but it's often not the case. And then they should consider next time when they spend millions of dollars on a very big campaign, if their goal is a very narrow target group, for which TV isn't necessarily the best way always, for example. You could look more at social media. So it's very important, but it's very, very important to sort of have this more truth-based tracking that's actually detecting real-world changes. So in the future of brand tracking, you can get much more precise estimates for, say, mothers with children, for men with mustaches who love burgers, or for recent graduates who play pool. You can zoom into any niche target group and estimate more precisely if your marketing is working with them. So we've collected a lot of experiences with it now, and we've built sort of a standard model for it. And one thing that really excites me a lot too is what we've done with the traditional methods has often, in my experience, when I did brand tracking with clients, it's always been sort of, okay, these results are by 10 percentage points off, and there's always a discussion, so what happened? But you never can really say where it real-world changes, where it not, simply because no matter for how many factors you control, the traditional way, you're just very limited. So say if you're controlling for 3 or 4 variables, that's kind of the max. You can't go much deeper. With this new MRP model, we can control for up to 11 variables to keep the sample composition stable. So all this makes this approach very, very powerful, and I believe also necessary in the future if you really want to believe the results of your tracking studies. There's a lot of intellectual challenges with MRP that I'll be happy to discuss more with you and happy to receive your questions about it. Thank you.
So, any questions from Mr. P? We have a couple.
Thank you. Hi. No question. I just wanted to catch the kidding. So I'm Ana Maria. I'm from another area. I'm from PR, so I'm an outsider somehow here. I have just one question. So if the first campaign that you showed didn't work, why didn't they do a research before starting another one? Or why didn't they do a research before starting the one which didn't work? So
I don't think I'm the best person to answer that in the room because I've not worked on the corporate side. But it's often just the case that the research isn't done on time, or the people who got the insights or got the research weren't deciding based on it, or weren't so aware of the results. That's kind of the reasons that I've encountered in my work.
Oh, we have the first one. Here?
here.
Okay.
I mean, it sounds like you're doing some interesting things with the statistics there. What are the limitations on the MRP as a methodology? Mm-hmm. Presumably there's a lower limit on how many people have to be soccer players or whatever in your sample before it becomes valid.
Yeah, it's a great question. So what are the limitations of MRP? It's not a one-size-fits-all methodology. It's, for example, if you need doctors, you can't infer from non-doctors what you want to know about doctors, right? So the people have to be similar in enough regards, and the sample size needs to be high enough. You can't have a small audience like IT decision makers and sort of apply MRP magic to it, and all of a sudden the results are valid. You need sort of a broader base to kind of zoom in. That's one limitation. Another limitation is, and that's the intellectually challenging part, but it's also very exciting, I think. So you're not working really with raw data anymore, you're working with estimates, right? So for example, if you have a result, okay, 73%, so your brand awareness changed by 4 percentage points wave on wave. MRP tells you this is likely to be a significant change with 88% chance. But it also means you're working with estimates that are based on a model and not with raw data anymore. And this is a challenge for many tools that you might be using and operations you want to apply for the data. Just to give you one example, you can't use segmentations on your sample that are not built in the model, if that makes sense. So if you have an important segmentation, like you want to look at soccer playing females, but you haven't made them part of your model before, you can't do that. You need to build them into the model beforehand. So I think the use cases for MRP are not everything in every type of research, especially when it's hard to get enough people, but it's tracking research in general, because it keeps the sample composition stable, and it's kind of zooming into to niche audiences within a large sample. That's the two main use cases that I see.
Very easy question. How willing are you to show your breakdance skills?
Sorry?
How willing are you to show your breakdancing skills now?
Maybe over drinks later.
Everyone heard it, right?
Menu.
Okay, cool.
We heard that. And another one over here. My question was covered by... It's covered? Okay, great.
I just wanted to follow up on the previous question, the answer that you gave, that MRP works quite well in the tracking studies. Apart from that, have you tried testing it or the successful use cases in any other type of studies where this has worked?
Can you repeat the last part? And tested it in other...
Have you tested the MRP model in any other type of studies where it has worked? Do you have any other examples?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it generally works with all types of studies. Just it depends a bit on the goal. Like, for example, if you're doing sort of a regular one-off study where you're interested in the high-level results and you have a sample of 1,000 and you don't want to do any deeper segmentation, the traditional approach is actually fine and quite efficient if you sort of have, in most cases, right? So MRP is useful if you have a goal that's hard to achieve with this approach beforehand. Just to give you one example, one challenge is often when you do field work and the time that it takes, right? So you couldn't use MRP actually to make that much shorter. Just to give one example, so for our approach when it comes to sampling people through mobile devices, we typically have filled 90% of our quotas in the first 10% of the time, and the last 10% of the time takes 90% of the time. So for example, older, low-educated people in rural areas. So what MRP can do, it can do the same thing, what I explained. It can basically estimate what sort of older, more rural, lower-educated people would think. And we've done a test where we compared the traditional approach, the fieldwork time, and the MRP approach. And with the MRP approach, the fieldwork was done within 8 hours instead of 14 days. So that's a 98% reduction in fieldwork time. So it can also be very efficient when it comes to solving that challenge.
Okay. So is there any baseline or any criteria where you can say that MRP will work at this particular sample size or set? Below this, it's unstable. Beyond this, yes, I can apply MRP. How do you draw that line in the sand?
It's hard to say because it's not necessarily sample size that matters. Like, just to give you one example, our standard model is kind of self-learning, especially when you do tracking. So what we typically do is we have a baseline study with a very large sample size, say 2,000 or 3,000, and then it automatically builds every effect of that sample into the model. And then in the next wave, you can achieve the same certainty with a sample of 300 or 400 maybe. Right? So it really depends on the variables that you want to look at and you want to keep constant. But overall, I think you can, just to give one other example, in the same study that I quoted, where we saved 98% time, we were also arrived at the same results with half the sample size. Right? So once the traditional way of studying it had like a sample size of 3,000, and with MRP we arrived at the same results with a sample size of 1,500.
Okay. If we're quick, we can take both questions.
Thank you for the presentation. If we have already a brand tracking tool, is it possible to apply that MRP utilizing our own research?
Yes. So MRP can also work with any past data.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for the presentation. Just a question regarding comparing data over time. Is this impacting the significant, like the significant differences you could see between the different time points? Because you're like clustering you're making different clusters basically across the different time points.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So significance testing. Basically, MRP already sort of includes a different way of testing for significance, right? So in the traditional way, there is a couple of different standard significance tests that you can do. With MRP, that's kind of already testing that. So when you see a change, the model will automatically tell you that change, say, of 5 percentage points is significant with 88% likelihood.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Will it be quick?
You want the mic?
Very quick one. Do you have cases in B2B industry for usage of MRP, or you have already, have you tested it with professionals?
I'm afraid not. In B2B, we haven't really tested it. As I mentioned before, it's not really possible to infer from only a small sample to kind of make it bigger, right? I think there are possible cases where there are likely overlaps in your B2B audience. Like, for example, if you say IT decision makers and you make the restrictions a bit less. So, for example, you're not only talking about IT decision makers in companies above 5,000 employees, but you also do down to 50.
Yeah.
So because these people below 5,000, you can use to improve your estimate for the people above 5,000.
Right.
The same with any other restriction criteria, their level of seniority. Say you want only super senior people. With MRP, you could actually use less senior people to improve the estimate for the more senior people.
Got it. Are you willing to do a pilot?
Sure.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Mr. P, thanks for the advanced data science, and we look forward to seeing the advanced breakdance later.